Okay, hello Sugar Buns, welcome to the Flywheel tier list for Hunters Edition for Season 22. So this is not a Flywheel Hunter tier list for it's not each and every different survivors bring Flywheel countering each and every different hunters, because it'll just take way too long. So let's just take Lucky Guy as our prime example, because he is the worst survivor, to be fair with you, in IDV. So he's the worst at decode, he's the worst at kite, he's the worst at rescue, he's the worst at assist, because there's just way better characters out there. So let's just imagine Lucky Guy bringing Flywheel against every single one of these hunters. We have Ember. To be fairly honest, Ember is kind of a so-so counter when it comes to survivors with Flywheel, cause I mean Ember's basic attack is slow either way. That's why a lot of people run hunt on him. But even if you Flywheeled his first attack, there is still this huge possibility that his red phantom, his puppets, land a hit on you. The reason why he's so-so to me is simply because of the fact that, you can use Flywheel to, you can use Flywheel to counter his phantom hits, you can use Flywheel to counter the puppet hits, but then at the end of the day, it's gonna be an even exchange. It's like a 50-50 exchange. You're either going to Flywheel his own hit, or you're gonna Flywheel the phantom's hit. And of course, since Flywheel has been adjusted from 30 to 50 seconds, I think simply saying I think it's alright. It's not too bad. If you really Flywheel if they really Flywheel his hit, you can immediately phantom and then break the pallet and then continue to chase. I think it's not too bad for Ember in general, because it's a 50-50 exchange. He can put puppets, he has phantoms. It's not too bad, but Ember is still overall in the general tier list one of the weakest hunters we have. Next we will have Flywheel for Smiley Face. Now for Joker in general, Flywheel is going to be a really hard counter. That is only, to be fair, that is only that's only when they can manage to kite 50 seconds, but after that he can't really chase after anyone who has Flywheel. Flywheel counters his rocket dash the most. You can easily rocket dash a Flywheel unless the Joker can bait it out, but of course that requires a lot of games played with Joker and a lot of games against Flywheel played with Joker, basically learning from your mistakes, which I simply think is quite hard. It counters Joker quite a lot. You can Flywheel the rocket dash very easily, and you can rotate into a pallet because of that. Joker also has a 2-second animation before he can move and basic hit, so that is enough time for you to either use an item, get your speed boost, rotate into somewhere else. So it's really hard for Smiley Face. Next we will have GameKeeper. For GameKeeper in general, right, I think for GameKeeper it is a so-so. For GameKeeper it is a so-so. GameKeeper is so-so because it's once again an even exchange. You can Flywheel a trap if you want to go towards the nearest kiting area, or you can Flywheel a hook. But usually when you Flywheel a hook, it's really hard to Flywheel a hook, to be fair. I mean, you could do it, but then when you Flywheel a hook and then the hook lands at a tree or an obstacle, pulls the GameKeeper in, and then he can hook again, it's not really that easy. And of course when GameKeeper is at max presence as well, he can have infinite hooks. Therefore, even if you Flywheel it to dodge it, I don't think GameKeeper will actually aim the hook at you. He'll just aim at the objects near you, make sure you slow down, and probably land a normal hit. If the normal hit doesn't land, he can use the hook once again because it's infinite, pull you back and then hit you normally. Which is what I believe for GameKeeper in general. It's a so-so, it's an equal exchange. It's not that much of a hard counter, neither is it a mini counter. It's an evil exchange, similar to Ember. Now, next we will have Ripper. Ripper for me I will consider Ripper as a mini counter. Now, reason being that after Flywheel right now has been nerfed, so Flywheel CD has been increased from 30 to 50 seconds. It simply just means that Ripper can, if it's a good Ripper, he can definitely land his Rocket Blade early game within 20 seconds. land the Foggy Blade, break the pallet, get his speed boost, and then hit again to immediately down the survivor, meaning that there is, simply no flywheel effect for them to use. Now, of course, you may think, hey, what if I can rebound kite a Ripper with flywheel? I mean, of course that's possible, but that simply depends on the character, efficiency you have with the character, how many games you've played with them, and your game sense in general. Because, of course you can flywheel a Foggy Blade, but what if the Ripper didn't hit you? So he Foggy Blades, but then he can still move because he didn't actually use a basic attack. Then, it's gonna be a bit of an oof moment. But like for second chase, flywheel, of course, you can definitely go for it. But for first chase in general, if someone gets down really fast for Ripper, that's already, a 70% win game for them. Now, continue on, we have Soul Weaver. For Soul Weaver, it kind of considers as a mini counter, right? Because this simply depends on Soul Weaver's efficiency as well with her webs. Of course, for the pro Soul Weavers, we know they're not busy. Well, not busy. I mean, they're not in a hurry to use their webs. They usually chase a survivor first, break some pallets, and then use the webs before blink. And when they know that they can land a hit, so then they put their 3 webs. Okay, if they dodge the first 3 webs in a row, the 3 speed boost and the normal hit, flywheel it. That's okay. Soul Weaver can just put another web up, still have her 3 speed boost and immediately hit the survivor, which means that your flywheel was basically ineffective. It's a mini counter because usually for Soul Weaver, right, when she's catching up to you, you're in an open area, you're kind of making distance, which is why Soul Weaver is like, okay, I can put 3 web threads in a row, I can catch up, I can hit. It's a mini counter when it comes to, tight kiting, like, when they flywheel and they can go in between pallets, then it's kind of really hard to get the hit on them because A, you need to break the pallet, and if you break the pallet you will lose your 3 speed boosts, your 3 stacks of speed boost, and B, if you don't break the pallet and then you efficiently place down another web for to maintain your speed boost, it's also going to be hard to hit the survivor as well because it's a tight space. So like, if you can hit them, then great, but the chances of you being able to hit them while they're camping pallets, because usually pallets there are like 2 or 3 around, it's not going to be that easy. So that is it for Soul Weaver. It simply depends on where you are, which is why it's a mini counter. Of course, you can flywheel a spit as well, her web spit, you can flywheel that, but I think that's quite a good thing if you're at like if you're already 1 chip and then you flywheel the spit, you're not at half health, you're not instant down. It's a mini counter for Soul Weaver depending on who goes against them. Next then we will have Geisha. Geisha will be considered as a mini counter as well. And of course people will be like, why wouldn't Geisha be considered as Flywheel tier? Well, simply because Geisha has butterflies, right? So, Geisha butterfly dash, immediately she can land a hit if she's really good with her butterflies and her dash. But in general, survivors tight kite a Geisha, they would rarely, and I mean rarely, make distance. The only time that survivor really makes difference is when the Geisha is either used her dash already, which means that the dash is already in a second cooldown, or they use an item to, stun the hunter, gain some distance, go towards the nearest kiting area. And then when that happens, of course I know Geisha can still butterfly dash through the pallet and then hit them. But when that happens, sometimes you will have survivors who flywheel that dash hit and then immediately vault the pallet, and that's another 8 second gone. Usually I wouldn't. Usually this would happen. To be fair, usually this would happen because Geisha's pallet mind game is absolutely insane. There's only flywheel there to help you, but like you can only flywheel it once and then it'll be on a 2.5-minute cooldown, 120 second cooldown. So you can only use this once in your first kite and then like another time for your rebound kite after you get rescued for the second time. So it's not such a hard counter to Geisha, but it still does counter Geisha's pallet mind game in a way. Next we will have Wu-chan. Wu-chan is considered a mini counter as well, simply because it's a the flywheel CD has been increased to 50 seconds, so 50 seconds flywheel before you can use it. Wu-chan is a hunter that prioritizes on ambushing survivors on ciphers. So if you ambush successfully once, you teleport them, they're decoding cipher, you hit them, and then if you run Insolence, of course, you'll have your bell ready because you're a black Wu. You bell them, and you basically hit them down because they can't really use any interactions. But also, it's a mini counter simply because you can flywheel his Infinite Nirvana. Usually survivors will not flywheel his spell, it's not worth it. You can flywheel an Infinite Nirvana just so you can guarantee, you know, a rescue if you don't have Tide, or if all the rescuers already used their Tide, you can go rescue too. You're not afraid of Infinite Nirvana. If you're kiting, you don't need to be afraid of Infinite Nirvana. You have Flywheel there to help you to kite a little bit longer, to allow you to use interactions as well. So the only counter there for Wu really is his basic hits in general, but you know, it's being increased, so it's not too bad. It's not considered as a so-so tier now, it's considered as a mini counter when, of course, you flywheel an Infinite Nirvana or you flywheel a Blink hit, which I think is quite... It's really rare for that to happen, because usually when a Wu blinks, he's a black guard, he's not a white guard. So yeah, that's my opinion on Wu. Now for Joseph, we will have hard counter. Joseph is a hard counter. Joseph doesn't consider it as a flywheel OP because he can still down survivors in Photo World, meaning that if Joseph incaps them and then charges survivor, A, the survivor will be incapped immediately after Photo World ends, and of course B, if he successfully controls the survivor's health, he can instantly blink down a survivor. Now you may be thinking, oh, they can flywheel the blink. My answer to that honestly is you can bait the flywheel by like, you know, attacking on air while moving on them but not using blink, so then they will use flywheel. Or B, don't chase after them, whoever has flywheel, to be fair, because usually you would chair survivors that are fast at decoding, right? You wouldn't chair rescuers. Well, you probably would chair rescuers if you can only chair the rescuers, but in general you would chair the survivors that decode fast. So you wouldn't chair a merc, you wouldn't chair forward, you would chair, like, you know, a psychologist or an acrobat, let's say it this way. And if they really flywheel you, then I think that's just really unlucky. But then at the end of the day, it's not flywheel OP because it's really hard to blink predict with flywheel. It's not worth it as well in a way, because if you're in an open area and then you use your flywheel in the with the blink, you're gonna get hit anyways. If you're in a tight area, maybe it will work, but it's gonna be really hard for survivors to counter that. So Joseph is considered a hard counter against flywheel. Flywheel hard counters him, but it shouldn't be too bad as long as you know what you're doing in general. Okay, next we will have Mad Eyes. Mad Eyes, I think Mad Eyes simply depends on so-so. Mad Eyes is a so-so depending on how good the Mad Eyes is. So if we take CN Mad Eyes for an example, the only way that flywheel counters a Mad Eyes is either A, the basic hit gets flywheeled, or B, the fence gets flywheeled. So hear me out. When Mad Eyes uses his fence, you can flywheel towards the fence to avoid the chip, or you can flywheel immediately into the... or you can flywheel immediately, like, away from the fence, just so that, you know, you can dodge the chip hit and you can get past the fence as well. Because usually in... I think I need to explain that more. So Mad Eyes is the type that uses fence to chip survivors and to block some areas. If you can, of course, during some situations, if you're at a really crucial point where, like, you're very close to go through the fence area before it generates, and then you have flywheel, you can flywheel that and immediately pass the fence without getting chipped. Because for Mad Eyes, he basically everything about him is bad. He has no chase, he has to rely on his chip, But of course, in the case of talking about a good Mad Eyes, even if you do Flywheel offense, he can just change, he can just remote control another machine and, you know, trap you once again. But this really simply depends on the Mad Eyes. I don't think, like, the only way you can counter the Mad Eyes with Flywheel is basic hit or Flywheel the offense. Aside from that, there's really nothing much I can say. Now then, next we will have Feaster. Feaster will be considered a hard counter because Feaster mainly relies on his tentacles to land a normal basic hit, if you know what I mean, from a long distance. Of course, he has a very long hitbox. He has the longest hitbox in IDV Hunter amongst the hunters in IDV. But you can easily Flywheel a tentacle if you think that the tentacle is gonna hit you. You can easily escape from a choke point if the tentacle is blocking your route. Just when the tentacle is in animation, you can immediately Flywheel and avoid the hit. Of course, I know people are gonna say, but Feaster uses Patroller. Well, you can Flywheel a Patroller too, which is why it's kind of a little bit of a hard counter for Feaster as well. You can Flywheel a Patroller. Right, if he brings Blink, then you can Flywheel the tentacles and then like force him to blink, and then you can continue to kite. But if he has a Patroller, then you know that he doesn't have Blink, so you're basically now focusing on kiting. Make sure he wastes his tentacles, Flywheel the Patroller, so then you can still make more distance from the Feaster. Because when hunters put down Patroller, they stand still. So that's basically your cue to move away from the hunter. When the Patroller bites you, before the next bite, you Flywheel it and then you can still move. And then like after that, all the bites will be shortened down by quite a bit. So it's quite a hard counter towards the Feaster for Flywheel. Next we will have Dream Witch. Dream Witch for me is considered as Fly-Who. Why now, you may ask? Because it doesn't really matter at the end of the day for Dream Witch. She is a sandwich artist, she's a map controlling artist, and of course she is a camp artist in a way. Survivors who usually being Flywheel against a Dream Witch would either Flywheel main followers hit or Flywheel the Patroller. But like after that, if they really Flywheel the Patroller, I think it's worth it, of course. But then like if it's a good Dream Witch, it's really not gonna work against a good Dream Witch. Personally, I think like, you know, window boost is significantly better because you just want to make distance from the Dream Witch when she puts down the Patroller. So then like, you know, you force the Dream Witch to use your own leech to hit, and then, you know, you basically force Dream Witch to dispel your leech. So then like Dream Witch only has her main follower to chase you, which is why I think it's Dream Witch Fly-Who? What's Flywheel? And then moving on, we'll have Axeboy. Axeboy will be considered as Flywheel OP simply because Axeboy relies a little bit too much on his fireballs, right? For the first set, he has nothing at all, right? So early game survivors will be breaking down trees, and then like when the survivor has heartbeat, they will immediately put down a tree. You will have a 20-second immunity from all fireballs. You can rotate to a better area after using the Pallidson, and Axeboy really can't do anything. Of course, if there's purple fire orbs around you and Axeboy pulls it, you can immediately Flywheel to cancel the purple fire orb. You take the fireball, you're immune from damage, and you don't give Axeboy the speed boost. How good is that? Early game for Axeboy, he depends too much on his fire orbs and his purple orbs. So if you can do this well, and I'm sure all survivors can do this well, because you know survivors know how to counter the fire orbs, the purple orbs, because you know high tier know how to do this, and I'm sure low tier knows how to do this too. And in the situation where you're in a pinch, Flywheel, no problem, continue to kite, still hasn't gotten a hit yet. He has no ability, and he has no map control. That is early game only. So it simply depends on who the first chase is for Axeboy. But of course, if they have Flywheel, it's crybaby time. Yeah, it's crybaby time. Moving on, we will have Evil Reptilian. Personally speaking, I would say Evil Reptilian will be a equal exchange of it will be so tier for Evil Reptilian. Evil Reptilian overall doesn't care about whether you have Flywheel or whether you have Window Boost. I simply just think that it depends on how Reptilian plays, right? Because early game Reptilian can only dash, and of course if you're tie-kiting in an area, you can't really jump properly. If you know what I mean, you can't really jump properly. And like, if they really do jump, sometimes, like a lot of the time survivors know and can't predict where they're gonna jump. And of course, if they're gonna smash, if the Reptilian's gonna smash down to the ground, well, guess what? It actually outlines the survivors where the Reptilian will smash, so they can just immediately flywheel the smash, right? So then like they can just take a basic hit and then rotate to the next nearest kiting area. It's a 50-50 because Reptilian can jump, right? Reptilian can jump. Of course it consumes energy, but like it's not like it's such a long cooldown comparing to like Mary, let's say. It's not such a long cooldown, so it's actually alright for Reptilian. Of course, it'll be very annoying towards, you know, some survivors with Flywheel against Reptilian is really annoying, but you know, this is basically the general gist. Reptilian's a 50-50, these are so. It simply depends on how you play and depends on where the area you are, but then if they really do Flywheel your smash or your jump, that's okay. Wait for the next jump and I'm sure you'll be able to get a hit. Now then, next we will have Bloody Queen. Bloody Queen is considered a hard counter for me, right? And listen to what I have to say. I know people may be saying, well, Bloody Queen, if they flywheel it, Bloody Queen can just move and, you know, close up the distance and, you know, hit the survivor. Well, let me tell you this. It's really hard. I'm sorry, it's really hard. Especially when you know where the queen is putting her mirrors. Right, it's really hard, especially when you know where the queen is pulling her mirrors. Because if, like, let's just say, I'll give you a random map example. Let's just say Arms Factory. Bloody Queen pulls a mirror there, right? She's on the other side of the factory and you're on the other side of the factory. She pulls the mirror up, she needs to catch up to you, you flywheel the hit, and you run towards an area where BQ cannot move towards because she's blocked by obstacles. Now you are forced the BQ to teleport to switch places with her mirror image, and then survivors will be using the item to either stun, create distance, or move away from the BQ. That one miss mirror already means that this game is gonna go into a tie game. Why? Because one mirror is 30 seconds of your time. Pull the mirror out, it's 15 seconds mirror time. The mirror vanishes, 15 second cooldown. That's 30 seconds there overall. And of course you have an 8 second early game when there's 8 seconds when the game starts where there's a cooldown as well, so 38 seconds gone. That's basically 40% of the cipher done. And then after your next hit, that's another 30 seconds, but of course that's, you know, around 70 seconds in general. 3 ciphers pop, you use your blink down. It's a tie game. BQ focuses too much on being flawless, right? And I'm sure, you know, good BQs know how to counter flywheel, but it's really hard in general, especially when you're in the same tier. Survivors know where you mirrored, survivors know where you can't go because of obstacles, and that's where the survivors will go. They will force you to teleport, well, not to teleport, to switch places with the mirror image, and it's going to be quite a hard time for you early game. Moving on, we will have Bonbon. Bonbon's considered a mini counter, depending on how good you are against dodging bombs. Now, hear me out on this. Imagine you got a normal hit, and then you got a chip, and then you flywheel a chip. Well, then that just means that you can kite for a little bit longer because he doesn't have a remote control bomb. And of course, in the situation where he does have a remote control bomb, and you know you don't want to get chipped, you can flywheel that as well. Because when Bonbon places down a remote control bomb, you have like this 1 second to 2 second interval where you can react to flywheel the bomb. No problem, that's okay. And of course for, you know, his chain bombs as well, it may be a little bit hard, but usually it's really hard for hunters like Bonbon to, you know, perfectly line up their bombs just when they're about to explode. So that's usually for bomb players who have really high efficiency on playing on him. But like, Flywheel doesn't counter bomb, but it does have a small mini counter in a way, if you know what I mean. I shouldn't even be saying that. Now, next we will have Disciple. For me personally, Disciple counts as a Fly-Who. I originally wanted to say mini counter because you can flywheel the stun, but then like there's way too much factors for me to consider it. Because of course you can flywheel the stun. Yeah, I get it, but it depends on how big the radius is, right? And it's really hard because you have to take into consideration of your own movement speed, the hunter's movement speed, and when the hunter's gonna enter the cat radius, right? So then when you flywheel that, it has to be an perfect timing flywheel to cancel the stun from the An, which for me is way too hard. So flywheel doesn't really counter An counters flywheel, of course. If survivors want to use flywheel to counter An, it's way too hard. Personally, it's really way too hard. So I don't really think flywheel does anything. For An as well, to counter her, you need to create distance from her, so then you know she can't jump to you as fast since you created such a big distance. So yeah, I think An actually counters flywheel. And then moving on, we will have Violinist. For Violini, it's considered a so-so for me. So Violini is considered a so-so. Why, you may ask? Because so Violinist has like an 8-second cooldown with his strings, and you need to land it properly, right? In high tier or in mid tier or in low tier, in the case of both Hunter and Survivor have the same game sense, skill, and gameplay, let's say. I would say like 60 times, like 6 out of 10 times, survivors know how to dodge the strings. 6 out of 10 times they know how to dodge the strings if they know what they're doing, to be fair. So whether you actually have, you know, windows or flywheel, it depends on your own sidestep. Of course you can flywheel a string as well. I'm not saying you can't. Of course you can. You can flywheel his presence to whatever AoE damage that is. But I think it's so-so. Like whether it's flywheel or windows, it depends on really how you play. Whether you like kite-kiting or creating distance from the hunter. But for Violinist, it's so-so. It's not like Mary, which is a really long cooldown. It's only 8 seconds or 12 seconds. I'm just gonna say 12 just in case. It's 12 seconds. It's not a big deal, just like 30 seconds. So for me, it's fine. It's really fine. It's so-so. It's an equal exchange. And of course, you don't really get flywheel until 50 seconds in the game. So yeah. Now next we will have Sculptor. Sculptor is a mini counter as well, and I know what people are gonna say. It's not considered a mini counter, but for me, it's only a mini counter when it comes to basic hits, let's say. It's rarely a mini counter when it comes to her chips. It's usually a mini counter when it comes to her hits. Because if we take like Sculptor, Bonbon, 2 chip hunters, right? Bonbon has fast attack speed, Sculptor has slow attack speed. Usually when Sculptor hits, like let's say Sculptor places a pallet in between, if places a statue in between the pallets, you can't go through, and then the Sculptor hits, you can immediately flywheel the hit, go behind the pallet, and then like, oops, I shouldn't be slapping that, and pallet mind game, put the pallet down, continue to kite. That's the only mini counter that Sculptor has. That's the only mini counter Flywheel has against a Sculptor. So it's not really considered as a Fly-Who because it's really easy to flywheel Sculptor's basic hit, which, you know, I've said across the multiple series of these as well. It's really hard for you to get a Terror Shock with Sculptor, and it's really hard for you to get a Chair Shock with Sculptor. So it's a mini counter, it's not a Fly-Who, it's a mini counter, Next we will have Undead. Well, personally for Undead, I would say it would be a mini counter. It's not a hard counter because it's really hard to grasp the time of his dash as well. Like, you need to grasp the time of his dash. Like, if his dash didn't even land, like, didn't even, like, you know, get close to you and you used Flywheel, you basically wasted your Flywheel, right? And like, even if his dash did, even if you did like get immunity from his dash, it's not like he has attack recovery animation. He can just dash again and hit you. You know what I mean? The only mini counter to Undead is when he uses his phase 1 skill, which is basically the AoE that he has to charge up to knock survivors up, to stun them, for them unable to move, and you know, use it again to deal half damage of health to them. You can counter that because there's an animation for that. There's an animation for the earthquake as well, the electricity earthquake on the ground, so I wouldn't say it's that hard to counter an Undead with Flywheel, but for Flywheel it's considered as a mini counter. Continuing on, we will have Pollen. Pollen is considered as a Flywheel OP. I don't really have to explain. You can Flywheel his Thanos Snap, you can Flywheel his Trap, you can Flywheel his Spikes. It hurts Pollen overall because, I mean, like, of course he doesn't have to get a really fast in early game. He's more focused on map control. But because of this, like, if two of the Kiter survivor, fast decoding survivor has Flywheel, it's really hard for Pollen to even do anything. Where you can Flywheel the Trap, and usually the trap you can Flywheel the trap, and usually the traps are in between pallets, so you can just do that immediately, immune to the stun, put the pallet down, continue to kite, and smile. So yeah, it's a really hard counter for Pollen. Now then, continuing on, we will have Nightmare. For Nightmare, I will consider this as a Fly-Who. Cause, like, Nightmare, I understand you Flywheel towards the pallet, they put the pallet down, okay, yeah, but like, they usually bring fast pallet breaking, so after breaking the pallet, they can immediately hit again to, you know, get their hit. And of course, a max presence Nightmare, you can dash twice, even if you do Flywheel the dash, which is really hard, similar to the Disciple, really hard. You need to grasp the timing properly. Even if you do it properly, they can just immediately dash again because of their skill, you know. So, it's a Fly-Who for Nightmare. What's Flywheel? Haha, I wonder. Continuing on, we will have Wax Artist. Wax Artist is a mini counter as well, I would say. It's not such a hard counter because, like, Wax Artist Ming already knows that if the survivor has Flywheel, they will Flywheel the Wax stun. But of course, for Wax Artist to counter that, he has to bait the Flywheel out, which, you know, 90 times out of 100 they manage to do it, because, you know, when you press the button and you immediately release it, there's an animation, but he doesn't shoot. So they can immediately force the Flywheel out there and, you know, basically wax again, stun them, get the basic hit, yada 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 yada. It's a mini counter for Wax Artist as well. On the other hand, because of, you know, the, what you call it, like, if he puts down his phase 1 AoE stun, AoE wax, yeah, of course you can easily Flywheel that, and you can Flywheel that with hot wax as well. But it's still a mini counter. It's not such a hard counter for Wax Artist because, like, what counters Wax Artist really is tight kiting on walls in general. And then not last but not least, but we have Clerk. For Clerk I would say so-so. Clerk I would say so-so because Windows counter her and Flywheel counters her. It doesn't really matter what survivors bring, it's just a so-so. This simply depends on how survivors play, on how Clerk play and on how survivors play, but like, usually I would say it's within Clerk's hand to do what she needs to do. So yeah, that's I can't really say much for Clerk because, like, they can only Flywheel her hit. There is no skill ability that the survivors can Flywheel against the Clerk, you know. Moving on, we will have Hermit. For Hermit in general, I would say Fly-Who, because it's really hard for survivors to Flywheel his electricities, his polarity electricity, whatever he puts down to stun the survivors. It's really hard simply because, like okay, you like let's just say you Flywheeled it, but then, like, what if when you Flywheeled it you're still in the area and you get pushed back and you get pulled back to stun? You know what I mean? It's way too risky. For Hermit as well, it's kind of like kite, walls, create distance, depends on you. Really depends on you. But like, yeah, I don't really think Flywheel counters Hermit in any way, shape, or form. Like, Hermit usually just stuns the survivor with polarity hit them. Like, you can Flywheel his basic hit, of course, but then like they can just immediately get the red polarity of when you have blue polarity, and then stun you and then hit you. You know, it's not that important whether survivors have Flywheel or not for Hermit. And base, oh yeah, I forgot, Lamar, I was supposed to say we concluded. Last but not least, we have Naiad. Naiad is considered as a hard counter, I would say. Similar, well, not similar to BQ, but like for Naiad, she is afraid of transitional kiting, and the current meta are all basically transitional kiters. Okay, it's like for Naiad, you can Flywheel her hit, you can Flywheel her puddle. And like, if the Naiad doesn't make a puddle and just wants to catch up to you, you can Flywheel that hit, put down the pallet, continue to kite. And like, when you do get the hit, you can rotate to a better kiting area where there is no puddle, which makes it really hard for Naiad to do really anything. I mean, of course people are gonna be like, but, Naiad, it's only 8 seconds. I know it's only 8 seconds CD, but how long would it take for her to even make a puddle? Probably 20 seconds, right? And like, against good survivors, it's hard to make a big puddle, to be fair. You can Flywheel the big puddle when you're in English, so survivors are not afraid in general. You can Flywheel the hit, whatever the survivor wants to do against Naiad. So it's considered a hard counter for me, to be fair. And I think that basically concludes it for the Hunter edition of Flywheel tier list. I mean, to be fair, I'm just looking at this and I'm telling myself, Flywheel OP is definitely correct, mini counter is definitely correct, Flyhu is definitely correct, hard counter, only photographer and feaster and BQ are correct. Maybe for Naiad people have different opinions, but for me she's a hard counter. For Clerk and so as well, people have different opinions, but for me, I believe she's a so-so. Same for Vio, Reptilian, Madaga, maybe Madaga is wrong, but like GameKeeper as well, and Ember. So if of course you have, like, feel free to express your own opinion, but this is my Flywheel tier list for season 22, and I hope you sugar buns enjoyed this, and I will see you all on the next series. I think it should be the Survivor tier list coming out for season 22. Now then, I will see you all on the next time. Bye byes.